Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Rabbi Tzvi Engel is a rabbi in Congregation Or Torah in Skokie, and he's had positions there. He went to YU and Yeshiva Har Etzion, but most importantly, our grandmothers were sisters. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Joel. Appreciate it. Well, welcome to everyone who's here and joining us both in New York and from my community here in Chicago, and family members from Montreal. I want to get right into the shiur to learn a little bit what a zchut it is to be able to give this shiur tonight and to share some thoughts with you about Parshat Bahalotcha and connected maybe to some messages about our moment. I put on the screen here just some sources, and I hope to learn them with you in the allotted time. We'll see how we fare. The picture, of course, is should be well known to us. It's called the Masa Alunkot. Everyone who serves in Tzahal, which I was not zocha to do, but I've heard from many friends who did, they engage in a targil. One of the exercises in order to train is they train with full gear, and one of the exercises is to actually carry someone on a stretcher. And to learn thereby what it means to be dependent on each other, to rely on each other, particularly under less than ideal conditions, to put it very, very charitably, and a time of embattlement. And of course, we're not in the same boat by any means as Chayalei Tzva Haganah Yisrael. But I thought tonight to share some thoughts about Parshat Bahalotcha as it relates to some of the themes of perhaps what we're up to at the moment. So here we go. There's a book that came out in 1990. It was about the Vietnam War. It's a very challenging book to read, the truth is, but it's a very interesting style. The author, Tim O'Brien, begins the book by framing everything against the backdrop of the name of the title of the book, The Things They Carried. And so he has pages and pages of quantification of every detail of what people carried. I gave you a little excerpt here. As a first lieutenant and platoon leader, Jimmy Cross carried a compass, maps, code books, binoculars, and a .45 caliber pistol that weighed 2.9 pounds fully loaded. He carried a strobe light and the responsibility for the lives of his men. This book goes on, and then further along in one of these opening passages, it says they carried all they could bear, and then some, including a silent awe for the terrible power of the things they carried. And of course, the book is a work of fiction, but reflects on some of what it meant to America, and particularly people who served in that war. And it just occurred to me that when we speak about carrying things, it doesn't always reflect physical carrying, but oftentimes is a metaphoric carrying as well. And they're all part of the list. So this is the Parsha in which we leave Har Sinai. The Torah already in Parshat Yitro tells us that Klal Yisrael arrived at Har Sinai. They've been at Har Sinai since Parshat Yitro. Now we're up to Parshat Bahalotcha. So through Sefer Shmot, through Sefer Vayikra, and now up to this moment in Sefer Bamidbar, when we learn that Klal Yisrael is going to leave Har Sinai. And the psukim in the Torah teach us about this. We're very familiar with them. They left the mountain of Hashem, a three-day journey. In order to scout out for them 3 days, the Ark of the Covenant of Hashem travel ahead of them in order to find rest for them. And the cloud of Hashem was upon them during the day as they left from the encampment, meaning as they pulled up stakes and moved. Then the Torah gives us two psukim that anyone who's been to shul or remembers going to shul, for those who have not yet returned to shul, two very well-known psukim, Vayihi bin Soha Aaron, Vayomer Moshe Kum Hashem v'yafutzu evecha v'yanusim esanecha mipanecha. When the Aaron would travel, Moshe would declare, "Arise, God, and scatter your enemies. May those who hate you be chased away from before you." And when the Ark of the Covenant of Hashem was put down to make the camp again, Moshe Rabbeinu say, Shuva Hashem Ruvot Alfei Yisrael, return Hashem to the thousands and myriads of the Jewish nation. You'll note, and I did a little bit of artwork here, I'm not that proficient at it, but I tried to recreate as best I could some very strange figures that appear in a Sefer Torah. There are two upside down nuns. They're called simanim, they're signs. They're in every single Sefer Torah. The Gemara wondered, Why are these simanim here? The Gemara Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kuf Tet Vav, quoting this exact pasuk, the Gemara asks, Parsha Zu Asala Kadosh Baruch Hu Simaniot Milamala Ulamata. There are signs on it, a nun upside down, before and after, in order to signify something about it. What is its meaning? So a few different ideas. First, Lomar She'ein Zeh Mekoma. The truth to tell, it doesn't belong here in the Torah. It really belongs properly much earlier in the book of Bamidbar, in the description of all of the flags, the standards, the way in which the Jewish people are arrayed as they're going out into the next phase of their journey. Instead, it's delayed and deferred here, in point of fact, to after they've already left. Up here, the Psukim, they already left Har Hashem. Then it's telling you that as they lifted it up, this is what Moshe had already said. It doesn't belong here. Rabbi Nasi, Rabbi Omer, Lomin Hashem Huzeh, El Pnei Sefer Chashuv Hu Bifnei Atzmo. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi disagrees. He says it does belong here. It's only here to tell us that these two psukim are like their own book in the Torah. And it goes on to explicate here that according to Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman, instead of the name of Rabbi Yonatan, there are not 5 books in the Torah. There are 7 books in the Torah. We have Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra. Then we have Devarim. But the book of Bamidbar is truly 3 books. The material in Parshat Bamidbar, Naso, the beginning of Parshat Baalotcha, and material from Parshat Baalotcha, Shlach, Korach, etc. That's a book. But there's a book that's extremely brief. It has only 85 characters, and it's these 2 psukim. Excuse me, bracketed by these 2 nuns. So these 2 psukim, Lamed Hey and the pasuk Lamed Vav. So that's the Gemara's contention. But the truth is, not everyone agrees. Who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel avers otherwise. He says that someday this parsha will not be here in Parshat Baalotcha. It will be written in its proper place. It's a little hard to understand what that means. He's making it seem as if this little section is, you could slide it around like a slide rule. It's not in the right spot, but truly it will be put back where it belongs someday in the future. The commentators discuss in the days of Mashiach, something like that. But why is it here then, if it's not truly its correct place, at least according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? And he answers, in order to differentiate between 2 calamities. The calamity, the latter calamity, which I didn't give you here, follows in the Torah, the people complaining, problems, the story of the Asafsuf, Kivrot Ta'ava, the complaints against the Mun, complaints against different things having to do with the Jewish people, then the request for the spies. It's unfortunately a cascading effect of one calamity after the other. So the Gemara says that's what's coming next. So that's why they needed a nun at the end. Okay. What is it bifurcating? What's the calamity that came before? What's the Puranut Rishona? Answers the Gemara, Vayusu Mehar Hashem. The initial calamity is the very fact of leaving the Har Hashem, the mountain of God. That in and of itself has a particular impact on them. Here they're leaving their moorings. Here they're so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they have to leave this place, which of course had no intrinsic significance, but for the fact that they had been at Har Sinai and heard from Hashem at that place. But now as they leave, there's a real anxiety. There's a worry. What's coming next? What's going to be in the future? And the idea that they left was in and of itself something that gave them pause. What will come of us in the future? It's a calamity. Some of the Mefarshim explain it a little bit differently, a little bit critically to the Jewish people. They're sort of happy to leave. This is very famously, we're in the month of June, so many schools are ending, where the Bali Tosfot, right? Ketinako Barech, Mibeta Sefer, they were like school children running out of school. But there are others who explain it otherwise, that the fact that they were leaving was itself a point that was somewhat, at least wistful, for what they had and what they had experienced there. And now they're going off, quite literally, into a wilderness, into an unknown future. Sure, they had their marching orders, but who knew what challenges lay ahead? How long would the journey be? They knew 11 days, unless they were delayed by a little while, and the journey started to stretch out before them. An ever-disappearing horizon beyond their reach, chasing the horizon that they could never quite attain. The Ramban notes, though, that they have one element that they took with them, that at the epicenter of everything, of leaving the mountain of Hashem, they have with them something they received at Har Sinai, and that is the Luchot. Having received the tablets from Hashem, placing them in an Aron Kodesh, into the Holy Ark, the Aron HaKodesh that's going to go with them and journey with them, that when they encamp is at the epicenter of, they are ringing the place of the Aron Kodesh. If they can keep that with them, then they can keep some of that experience of Har Sinai alive. We don't have time to read it all inside. This gave you like one line here. Hine Ikar, writes the Ramban, Hine Ikar HaChefetz BaMishkan. The point of the Mishkan was a place, a repository for the divine presence to dwell in their midst, and that is the Aron. As it says further earlier on, Parshat Truma, I will speak to you from between the two kruvim and atop the Aron Kodesh, on top of the element known as the kaporet, the cover with the two kruvim, the two cherubs. They're sometimes translated into English, which gives me more information than the word kruvim, so I prefer kruvim. I will meet you there. I'll speak to you from between the two kruvim. I'll meet you in that place. Wherever you take that Aron Kodesh, which is portable, you'll be bringing a part of Har Sinai with you. You could almost say that in the end, they took with them a piece of the rock, quite literally. I mean, the first set of luchot, the Kadosh Baruch Hu gives to Moshe directly, and that's that. But they get smashed. Well, they're in the box. But in addition to that, we have the second luchot avanim, karishonim. You hew these stones. I'll still write on them, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu. But now you're the one who has to come up with the stones, as it were, that are going to become these luchot shniot, the second set that will go into Aron Kodesh. V'zot Mishkan concludes the Ramban against a longer piece. But sort of that's the epicenter of it. Sheyeh kavar shechan al Har Sinai shochen alav b'nistar, in a hidden way, in an ongoing but hidden way. The divine presence that dwelt upon Har Sinai temporarily would now continue to dwell upon the Mishkan. Mishkan being, like the word Shechina, the presence. That's the Mishkan, is the repository of that presence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in the world. They could take it with them. Now, much of what I'm going to present from now to the end of the Shiur is really adapted from one of the Shiurim L'Zecher Abba Mori of Yosef Halevi Soloveitchik, which made a great impact on me in the first volume about Kriyat HaTorah. So I'm sharing I would say, the essence of his magisterial presentation. I hope I do it justice in some regard, but I guess you'll let me know after the fact. There are differentiated kiddushot, differentiated elements of sanctity when we speak about the sanctity of place, of Eretz Yisrael, of Yerushalayim. And what I hope to do is to unpack some of this now and to draw a link between that, in the iteration of Rabbi Soloveitchik, between that Kedusha, that sanctity, and what the Aron Kodesh means to Klal Yisrael, even until today, even in the year in which we find ourselves, even in the moment, stressful moment that we find ourselves in as Jewish people, and hopefully take some strength from that as we're going into Shabbat, Parashat B'halotcha. The Rambam, I gave you the English share courtesy of Chabad.org. You do a fine job translating. I don't have to translate free form, but I'll do it anyway here, and you could follow along in the translation. The Rambam, discussing in his halachot about the building of the Beit HaMikdash, explains that there were phases in the sanctity. You can read it for yourself while I'm talking, and then I'll do the free form. Once the Jewish people arrive in Yerushalayim, they sanctify, they consecrate it. Once the Jewish people, I just ask everyone to stay muted because the distortion on the line prevents me from being able to present. It throws me off. And okay. So once the Jewish people arrive in Yerushalayim, they sanctify. The Kedusha of Yerushalayim is sanctified. And of course, before they get to Yerushalayim, they come to Eretz Yisrael. They sanctify Eretz Yisrael. But remember that, as all of us are well aware, there are two Batei Mikdash, because the Jewish people arrive with Yeshua. Then they're exiled for 70 years. Then they return. They build a second Beit HaMikdash. And there's a question about the reality of perhaps a differentiation between Yerushalayim and its status versus the entire land of Israel. And the Rambam writes this as follows. He says that when there was a consecration, the Kedusha, that we were Makdesh, Yerushalayim, Kedusha Rishona Kitchelat Lava, once it was consecrated initially, it stayed for all time. Even the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, nothing could tear away its sanctity. However, when Yeshua ben Nun came with the Jewish people, Sefer Yehoshua, arrives in the land, conquers the 31 kings, apportions the land to the Jewish people. As long as the Jewish people lived there, they could fulfill the mitzvot connected to the land. But as soon as they were exiled, that was it. They could not perform those mitzvahs anymore, even if there was a remnant left in the land. You know why? The sanctity of the land of Israel, from the Rambam's perspective, evaporated when the Babylonian king carted them off. The sanctity of the Mikdash is related to the divine presence, and the divine presence can never be nullified. Omer quotes a pasuk to back this up from Parsha Bechukotai, and the Chachamim explain, even though there might be a destruction, the sanctity remains. But the obligation having to do with all the mitzvah klip aretz, including Shemitah that's coming up, Maser, etc., it's only because there was a conquest. But if the conquest is undone, then the sanctity is undone. The Torah no longer obligates the Jewish people to fulfill the mitzvot that are connected to the land of Israel, because it is no longer considered part of Eretz Yisrael, which is mind-boggling, because you could say, well, where did they come back to? Of course, they came back there. But here the Rambam adds the following layer. Pay close attention. When Ezra came back, V'kevan she'ala Ezra, v'kidsha, lo kidsha b'kibush, ela b'chazaka. When Ezra HaSofer came back in the Second Temple era, he consecrated the land not through military conquest, but by living there. She'echzikuba, the chazaka, they held the territory. And therefore, every place that they were machzik, every place that they were, those people came back from Bavel, that was sanctified in Kedusha of Ezra the second time. V'nitkadosh b'Kedusha Ezra, Hashniya, the second go-around when Ezra came, hu mekudash hayom, it remains sanctified. And even if the land was taken from us, which was in the Rambam's day, it still was the case, we're still obligated in all of these mitzvot. As I explained elsewhere, he says the basic gist of it is somehow, mysteriously, when Ezra did his chazaka on the land of Israel, the people dwelling there, living there, setting up encampments there, and just making a life, that was enough to consecrate it, and the Rambam concludes, for all time. And why is that more powerful than Yeshua's work? So journey with me and with the Aron Kodesh. When the Jewish people are ever going to go out to war, there is a scenario, God forbid, Jewish people have to go out to war. It's described in the Sefer Dvarim. So there will be a speech that will be given to them by the Kohen Meshuach Milchama. One of the particular Kohanim announces, he says to them, Aleim Shema Yisrael, Atem Kreivim Hayom L'Milchama Leveichem, Ayirach Levavchem, Al Tiru Val Tachbezu, Val Tatzum Mipneihem. Basically, don't be afraid, don't be worried, don't be scared, don't be anxiety-ridden. Don't see the enemy and turn around and make an about face. You know why? One reason, because God is with you. Everyone thinks the pasuk ends v'nomar amen, because this pasuk was put into the Tefillah Shlom Tzahal. That's the Tefillah for the Mishaberach for Tzahal. That took that pasuk, and with good reason. The Gemara says, what does it mean God is with you? In a spiritual sense? Yeah, okay. But the Gemara basically says, what's the difference? The Gemara says that you have something with you that the non-Jewish world, that the rest of the nations don't have. You know what that is? You have with you the Machane Aaron. You have with you, and this is actually halacha psuka, Jewish people, when they would go out to war, would take the Aron Kodesh with them out to the battlefield. And the Gemara, Masachet Sota describes, because the name of Hashem and all of the nicknames, all the cognates of Hashem's name are also placed into that Aron Kodesh. They would actually physically bring it out into the battlefield. Indeed, at the time of the conquest, Yeshua ben Nun is telling the people, rather, we're going to inherit the land, we're going to possess it, and here are the names of all the nations. And you know why? Because the actual Aron Kodesh will go before us on our trek, on our journey into Eretz Yisrael. So the idea of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael associated with the Aron Kodesh, and Soloveitchik starts explaining, how was the Eretz Yisrael mikudash by, how was it sanctified, consecrated by Yeshua ben Nun? Very simply, they literally carried it to the battlefield. Wherever it went, it spread Kedusha. Why? Because it was the repository of the Shechina, it was portable, and they brought it with them wherever we went. Of course, that was all a journey. A long journey, hundreds of years of a journey, as it turned out, until they finally brought it to Yerushalayim. In the Sefer Shmuel, David HaMelech decides it can't be that I'm already in control of this whole wide swath of land, and I have not yet built a home for Hashem. But the way he frames it is, Vayomer HaMelech al Natan Navi says to the prophet, I'm living in a house made of beautiful cedar wood, and the Ark of Hashem is in curtains. It's in a little tent, and therefore he wants to build the land now, build the Beit HaMikdash. As it turns out, he does not get to build it in his own lifetime, but he is told by the Navi, Natan, that his son will build it. And indeed, his son does build it. And here is from the dedication by Shlomo HaMelech of the land, of the actual location of the Beit HaMikdash and the moment of consecration, Yerushalayim. And it describes the idea about how he opens his own dedication speech, Shlomo HaMelech, some years later, after David, his father. And we learn at the epicenter of the dedication, before he has his, I would call it benediction, he gives a brach at all the people. What does he say? I'm putting the Aaron, Basim Sham Makom LaAaron, Asher Sham Brit Hashem Shekarat, Imavotim Botzio Otam Me'eretz Mitzrayim, drawing a line, a continuous line, a continuity from Vayihi bin Soa Aaron. This was finally the moment of Uvenucho Yomar, arriving in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Indeed, we'll skip Tosfot now for want of time. It's a little piece of Lumdus in here, but we don't have time for it tonight. The idea that there was a journey, that the journey had a beginning with Yoshua bin Nun, that was, as it were, the moment of Vayihi bin Soa Ha'aron, that throughout this process of Vayihi bin Soa Ha'aron, its travels were actually having the net effect, if you will, of spreading Kedusha for the time of the Kibush of Eretz in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because they physically brought the divine, the object representing the divine presence and the communication with Hashem, as it were. They brought Har Sinai to Eretz Yisrael. They took it all around the Nachla. And that's why we learn right at the very beginning of the Sefer Yeshua, at the death of Moshe. And right away, what do we hear? Kol makom shetidroch kaf raglechem bo lachem netativ kasher dibarti el Moshe. That's what Hashem says to Yoshua bin Nun. It doesn't mean you're walking. It means you're walking with the Aron Kodesh wherever you go. When you get to the Mikdash, it's the second pasuk of V'nucha Yomar Shiva Hashem Rifot Afei Yisrael. The Rambam writes, and Rabbi Soloveitchik picked up on this idea, that the Gemara has a debate. I mentioned this the other day on Shavuos in another shiur, in another context. The Gemara has a debate, what happened at the time of the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash? What happened to the Aron Kodesh? One opinion says that it was taken away to Bavel. The other opinion says it stayed in Yerushalayim and was somehow buried in tunnels that were dug by Shlomo HaMelech. It's a historical debate. It's not halachic. The Rambam paskins this debate. He thinks there is an answer, a halachic answer, which is that, of course, says the Rambam, halachically, he decides, as a matter of jurisprudence, you could say, halachic jurisprudence, that there were tunnels. That absolutely the Aron is still somewhere, somehow, under the Har HaBayit, with no apologies to any Hollywood movies from the late 70s, to the contrary. It's in Yerushalayim, ad hayom hazeh. You know why, says Rabbi Soloveitchik? Because ad hayom hazeh, what is the source, what is the font of Kedusha, that all Kedusha, Makom, emerges from? One place, one location, the place where the Aron Kodesh is. And when we understand this, we start to realize that there's an interplay between the Vayihi bin Soa Ha'aron finally arriving V'nucha Yomar in Yerushalayim in a manner that even if lo aleinu, there'll be a destruction, not once, but twice, the first Jewish Commonwealth, second Jewish Commonwealth, the Kedusha of Yerushalayim can never be torn asunder. It remains at all times. Look how the Rambam, when he wants to tell us in the halachot about making a place for the Sefer Torah in the Beit Knesset, in a shul, he says a mitzvah to have a specific, unique place for the Sefer Torah, a place that will be actually honorable, a place that will be majestic, dvarim shibaluchot, habrit, hein shibachol sefer v'sefer. And he throws in a line, all of that which is written in the luchot, in the tablets, is written in each and every Sefer Torah. I know that, you know that. If it doesn't have the Aseret Dibrot, then it's not a kosher Sefer Torah. The Rambam here amplifies, you're missing the boat. The point of the Sefer Torah is it's a representation of the Dvar Hashem and of the Luchot. The words of the Luchot are printed within it. The whole notion of the Kedusha of the Beit Knesset flows from this epicenter of Kedusha, the Sefer Torah, inside an Aron Kodesh. Indeed, when it refers in Parsha Truma to the idea of the building of the Mishkan, it mentions you'll put, Tata el ha'aron et ha'edut asher lecha, you'll put the testimony, meaning the luchot ha'edut. It says Rashi, ha'edut means haTorah shehi le'edut beini uveinechem, not just the tablets, but the Sefer Torah. Machloket, it's in the box or a special shelf outside the box. When it's finally written, that's where it goes. Shitziviti etchem mitzvah ktubot ba. It goes together. All right. And here the idea that a person that should be an Aron Kodesh, you put the Sefer Torah in it, the Rambam writes, and make sure that you're putting in the direction, everyone's davening in the direction of the Aron Kodesh. Why? Because the highest level of Kedusha in the shul is associated with the Aron Kodesh, which represents the same Aron Kodesh like in Yerushalayim. And the idea that the Kedushat Makom of the Beit Knesset, the Mikdash Me'at, as the Gemara Masechet Megillah refers to it, is in point of fact patterned after the Beit HaMikdash in Shalayim, whose Kedusha flows as a place of encountering the Shekhinah divine presence from the fact of the Aron Kodesh from Har Sinai, having made the journey of Jewish history and arriving in Yerushalayim. Every time we take out a Sefer Torah, we say, Vayibin Soa Aaron. We put back the Sefer Torah. What do we say? We always say the last paragraph before we sing. In my shul, we love to sing. First, we say the paragraph. And then we have psukim that we recite. No one knows. Where are these psukim from? You're throwing in a jumble of psukim. Not a jumble, nothing doing. This is the 132nd chapter of Tehillim. It's about the idea of the suffering of David HaMelech, the suffering, how he says, I'm never going to go to sleep. I can't. How can I go to sleep? How can I even close my eyes? How can I go be in some kind of a soporific state? The HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have a house yet, so he wants to build it. And what do we learn? Hashem, come to your place of rest, your abode, as it were, you and your Aaron, the Aaron Zecha, the Aaron of your strength. And then we have these other psukim we also recite when we are putting back the Sefer Torah. And the point here again and again is the Torah that we carry as we return to the Aron Kodesh is actually taking that journey, believe it or not. We say, Vayibin Soa Aaron, we take the Sefer Torah out. We move it, we read from it, then we close it, we put it back. And as we're putting it back, what do we say? Uvanucho Yomar. We're renewing that notion of the Kedusha again and again and again. And we're reminding ourselves of it's not that it's truly renewed, and putting it back into Aron Kodesh. Now, there's one question that hangs over this whole shiur that you could rightly ask me. We talked a lot about Yerushalayim. What about Eretz Yisrael? I mean, the Rabbi himself writes that the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael somehow dissipated or evaporated at the moment that the Jewish people were thrown out in 586 BCE. So now they come back, they come home. Ezra Sofer, no conquest. They just set up shop. They have houses, they live. And suddenly the Kedusha is there. And the Rabbi says, don't worry. Now the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael also for all time, no matter what, even if there will be destruction. How could that be? How could that be? Rabbi Soloveitchik explained as follows. He said, if you look in the Gemara Masechet Bava Kama, it tells you very strangely that Ezra HaSofer added certain takanot. He was metaking certain things for Judaism. He enacted them. And some of them had to do with reading of a Sefer Torah. It says, among other things, just for want of time, he decided to tell the people that among the things they needed to do, I'm skipping to get to the actual section, is that he said to the people, look, you know and I know that already from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, there were already Nevi'im who said we have to hear Torah read aloud 3 times a week, on Shabbos, Monday, and Thursday. I know, but I want to add a few things. What did he add? He said, look, initially one person could read just 3 psukim. Also, maybe it could be 3 people, each one would read 3 psukim. I want that to be the case now. I want it to be that each person who comes up, there should be 3 people will come up to the Torah. Those 3 people, they'll read 3 different aliyot as against the Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. And you know what? I want it also to be that 10 psukim will be read as against the 10 people who are constantly sitting and learning. The Rambam writes this up as well. He says, Moshe told the Jewish people that they have to read the Torah publicly on Shabbat, on Monday and Thursday at Shachri. Why? There shouldn't be 3 days without hearing the word of Torah read. But Ezra came and he added, oh yeah, mincha on Shabbos, you should also add, because I don't want people sitting idly. Also, I want you to read 3 people to be called to the Torah. And I also want to make sure that it should be at least 10 psukim that should be read. Then further along, I skipped many halachas here, the Rambam also adds from another Gemara that Ezra, from the days of Ezra, there was a minhag that there would be a turgaman. They would read a verse in the Torah, have someone translate to Aramaic. Read a verse in the Torah, translate to Aramaic. If you think Torah reading takes long now, imagine what it was like then. Every verse back and forth from Hebrew, Aramaic, Hebrew, Aramaic. It was a linear translation. Nobody had books. If you didn't understand Hebrew, you were sunk. But the lingua franca for many Jews, already in the time of Ezra Sofer, is Aramaic. So you were making the translation happen in a linear manner so that the people would understand what's going on. Rabbi Soloveitchik said, if you look at this carefully, you see the key right here. You know what Ezra HaSofer brought to bear that had not yet been a feature of Judaism, that he was bringing to the foreground, that every Jew needs to have an access to and an engagement with, not just the Torah as a scroll, not just hearing the words read aloud from Torah Shebichtav, but they have to engage it as Torah Sheba'al Peh. They have to engage it as an oral tradition that is actually the new lingua franca of a Jewish people at the time of the Second Commonwealth, largely without independence and without the trappings of statehood, but the trappings of a nation still not only proud of its patrimony, but living it. And that means being conversant in it and amplifying the theme of Torah Sheba'al Peh, an oral tradition that animates life entire. Therefore, says Rabbi Soloveitchik, what Ezra HaSofer brought to bear, as he said, I am basically creating a new paradigm. Whereas in Yeshua bin Nun, the armaments might have brought us where we need to be in our time. You know what we actually need? We need something else. We need people who are going to each one of them, and I'm ad-libbing the language, obviously, somewhat anachronistically, who will be more than foot soldiers in the army of Hashem. Here, not of an army of armaments, but an army of the intellect, and not stam of the intellect, but of the Dvar Hashem. And the way to do that is not just to have externalized books and tablets, but actually to have internalized it within. This is indeed when a person gets called to the Torah. Now we understand a little bit more. We take out the Torah, we say, Vayibin Soha Aron, we lift up the Sefer Torah, take it out of the Aron Kodesh, bring it to the Shulchan, open it up, unfurl it, and then we read from it. And nowadays we do not have the reading of the Targum. Hopefully everyone has a translation. They're trying to understand what's going on. But we still do have the idea, why 10 psukim? Why 10, as against the 10 people who are called the Batlanim, which was a certain way of referring to basically the people who were professional Talmidei Chachamim. They were the people who sit, today you'd say that people sit in yeshiva, they sit in kollel. They're the people whose professional job, I say every time, you're a great society. No great society, civilization, or culture did not have its scholars and its think tanks and its halls of academe. Lahadol fe'avdalot, ours are bate medrash. And therefore, we have to champion and prioritize that people should be able to sit and learn Torah, to mashkia, to invest time in order to build up Klal Yisrael in a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Said the Rav, when a Jew learns Torah Sheba'al Peh together with the Torah Shebichtav, they become the source of Kedusha. They have internalized the message of Torah, and wherever they go, they become a walking Sefer Torah. And that's what the brachas are. When a man gets called up to the Torah, we learn the Torah tells us the psak, bracha achrona kachu. When we finish reading the Torah, at the end of each aliyah, we say a bracha, asher natan Torah emet, v'chai olam natu b'tochenu. What do those words mean? The Torah explains, Torah emet, hi Torah shebichtav, the Torah of truth, that's the written Torah. V'chai olam natu b'tochenu, an everlasting life did God implant within us, hi Torah sheba'al peh. That's the oral tradition. There are 40 words in these two brachas. Keneged mem yamim she'amad Moshe bahar, as against the 40 days Moshe Rabbeinu was up on Har Sinai learning Torah. And so we learn here the idea that the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael in the days of Ezra came about as a result of a newfound understanding of the responsibility of every Jew to learn and to know the Dvar Hashem, and thereby, wherever they will go, to themselves become a font of Kedusha moving forward through the world. We're in tough times now, challenging times, and this shiur is called The Torah We Carry, but we're also being carried. The Kohanim actually, according to what we know from Chazal, didn't literally physically carry the Aron Kodesh. The Aron was noseh nosav. Somehow, in ways I don't understand rationally, but that's what Chazal described. The Aron Kodesh carried those who carried it. In Sefer Yeshaya, Shimu Elai Beit Yaakov v'chol she'erit Beit Yisrael ha'amusim minei veten hanesuim minei racham. Hear me, the house of Yaakov, all the remnant of the house of Yisrael, who are born from birth, who are carried from the womb. va'ad zikna anihu. Until you are old, I, Hashem, I am with you. Va'ad sevo, when your hair goes gray, ani esbol, I will carry you. Ani asiti, I made you. Vani esa, I will bear you. Vani esbol, and I will carry you. Va'amaleit, and I will rescue you. And I hope during this period of time, particularly Parshat Balotcha, we're taking the Aron Kodesh with us, if you will, to the battlefields of life, the battlefields of social media, whatever they may be. Lo aleinu, they shouldn't be in our streets. But I want to close tonight with a little gift. I'm taking a moment of personal privilege. Call it a family moment. Joel, I was so honored that you invited me, and I want to thank Rabbi Trump, of course, and the young Israel of Lawrence-Cedarhurst. But I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege. Speaking of the idea of carrying a Torah, our family carries a Torah. You and I are great-grandchildren of someone very special grandparents, generally. We have a great-grandfather that unites us, our Zeta Ben Sion. And Zeta Ben Sion was someone I obviously never met. His name was Rabbi Sion Ben Menachem Halevi, if I'm not mistaken. I saw that Sion earlier today. There's a picture of it online. And I want to share this little film clip with you and with everyone. Hopefully people can take a little bit of chizuk from it. When we talk about every family has a film strip like this, I'm sure, in some regard. And if you don't, then you can make one about you. Maybe you're the film strip for somebody else to be the Torah that other people will carry in the future.
העלינו לארץ ישראל, העלינו לארץ ישראל, וזכינו, וזכינו, לקדושת ארץ ישראל, העלינו לארץ ישראל, העלינו לארץ ישראל, וזכינו, וזכינו, לקדושת ארץ ישראל. הרחמן הוא יזכנו, הרחמן הוא יזכנו, לקדושת ארץ ישראל, לקדושת ארץ ישראל.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to give a shiur tonight, and I wish you all an Erev Tov.
Was that your family, Rabbi?
That was my Elter Zeta and Joel's Elter Zeta on the day he made Aliyah. Yeah, he made Aliyah in 1952. He was nifter in Tafshin Chav Beis, and he's buried in Bnei Brak.
Oh wow, 1952, 52?
52.
Wow, wow.
He's buried in Bnei Brak. In the Chalukah, right next to the Chazanit and Rav Kahneman.
Where did he come from? Poland or Russia?
Romania.
Romania. Ah.
Romania.
What was his name?
Anyone who's on this call is from the family. I'm glad we're having a reunion after all these years.
Yeah. Or your father's side or your mother's side, the Zayda?
On my mother's side. Welcome my parents, my father, my mother.
Yeah. My mother.
Stark.
Have a good
recorded, so maybe.
I see that Rabbi Trump is he's in Israel now, so it's very early in the morning for him.
Ah, okay. Well, send him regards.
It's Jewel. It was beautiful shiur. Yasher koach.
It was a wonderful shiur. Yasher koach. Wonderful shiur. Good Shabbos.
Okay.
Shalom al kol Israel.
Amen. Shebesoros tovos. Yeshuas v'nechamos. We need it. We need it. Klal Yisrael needs it now more than ever.
Amen.
Am Yisrael Chai.